My name is Micah Bell, but the people closest to me call me Key. I grew up in Whisper Hills, California, a town known for absolutely nothing, unless you happen to be fascinated by places with a population of 15,217 people and a talent for keeping everyone else's secrets. Whisper Hills sat tucked between rolling hills and endless stretches of dry California backroads. It had one high school, one grocery store everyone complained about but never stopped shopping at, and enough gossip to fuel the entire town for decades. People here knew who your parents were before they knew your name. They remembered your worst mistakes longer than your greatest accomplishments. Most kids spent their senior year dreaming about escape. They talked about colleges on the East Coast, apartments in Los Angeles, or road trips that would take them anywhere but here. I used to think I was different. I believed that Whisper Hills wasn't a place I needed to outrun. Then I met Julian. It happened on the last ball game of senior year beneath blinding stadium lights and the roar of a crowd that had no idea the rest of my life was about to change. Julian wasn't from Whisper Hills. He came from the next town over, a place close enough to visit but far enough away to feel like another world entirely. He was the kind of person people noticed without understanding why. Attractive without trying to be, confident without seeming arrogant, surrounded by friends but somehow impossible to truly know. Everyone had an opinion about Julian. Very few people had the truth. I certainly didn't. All I knew was that one look across a rainy road was enough to make me forget every carefully constructed version of who I thought I was. And in a town built on whispers, falling for someone like Julian Ayers was the loudest mistake I would ever make. I hated sports. I wasn't one of those guys who could throw a perfect spiral across a football field or score the winning goal at a soccer game. If there had been an Olympic event for tripping over my own feet in front of my classmates, I would have brought home the gold medal. By sophomore year, I'd fallen flat on my face in PE enough times to become a cautionary tale for incoming freshmen. So I joined the school newspaper. Officially, it was because I loved writing and wanted to contribute something meaningful to the school. Unofficially, it got me out of PE. Chelsea knew the truth. Chelsea had been my friend since we were very young, and she knew me so well that sometimes it felt as though she knew me better than I knew myself. She could tell when something was bothering me simply by the way I walked into a room. She noticed the little things, the hesitation before I answered a question, the way I avoided someone's eyes, or how I became unusually quiet when I was trying to hide how I really felt. I could tell her I was fine, but Chelsea rarely believed me. She had known me for so long that she didn't need an explanation. Sometimes she understood what I was feeling before I had even found the words for it myself. "You realize most people fake injuries to avoid dodgeball," she'd said one afternoon while editing an article on student council elections. "You're the first person I've met who joined journalism out of self-preservation." "It was either this or another concussion," I replied. She snorted, "Fair point." The thing was, I genuinely loved the newspaper. I loved interviewing people, even if talking to strangers made me nervous. I loved the smell of fresh ink on the printed pages and the excitement of seeing my byline beneath an article. I loved feeling like what I wrote mattered, even if it was just reporting on the spring dance theme or the results of the debate team's latest competition. Sometimes I thought about going to college for journalism. Maybe I'd work for a newspaper in San Francisco or Los Angeles someday. Maybe I'd tell stories that people actually cared about. But every time I started thinking seriously about the future, my mind went blank. I was 18 years old and had absolutely no clue what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And time was running out. It was May 1st, 1992, our senior year. Graduation was only weeks away, and there was one final ball game left before high school became a memory. One more game before I never had to see most of these people again. Especially the annoying jocks. Chelsea, meanwhile, had a plan, or at least something closer to a plan than I had. She'd been looking into community colleges nearby. Her parents worked hard, but money was always tight and scholarships were difficult to come by. "I'll figure it out," she said one afternoon as we sorted through layouts for the final issue of the school newspaper. People always figure it out. I wished I shared her confidence. The truth was, everyone around me seemed to be moving toward something. college, jobs, relationships, futures. Meanwhile, I was sitting in the newspaper office with ink-stained fingers, trying not to think about the fact that childhood had an expiration date. In a few weeks, the final bell would ring. Whisper Hills would keep going exactly as it always had. And the rest of us would have to decide whether to stay or finally leave. I wore my black hoodie everywhere. It was old and faded by then, the drawstrings frayed at the ends, and the sleeves stretched from years of being pulled over my hands whenever I felt nervous. Most people probably thought it was just another sweatshirt. To me, it was everything. My father had given it to me before my parents left on one of their summer trips back in 1985. At the time, I'd complained that it was too big. "You'll grow into it," Dad had said with a laugh. He was right. I wore that hoodie to school, I wore it while doing homework, I wore it to bed on nights when the house felt too quiet. I wore it everywhere because it reminded me of a time when life had been simple and safe and my parents had still been alive. 7 years ago, when I was 11, my parents were killed in a car accident. One day they were here making plans and promising to bring back souvenirs from their trip. The next day they were gone. People say grief gets easier with time. I don't know if that's true. I think you just learn how to carry it. After the accident, I moved in with my maternal grandmother in Whisper Hills. Her small house sat only a few blocks from the high school, and she did her best to raise a grandson who suddenly needed more than she had ever expected to give. Grandma wasn't perfect. She burned toast almost every morning and thought every problem in the world could be solved with homemade soup. But she loved me. And after losing my parents, that love became the thing that kept me going. So I kept wearing the hoodie. Because some days, wrapping myself in it was the closest thing I had left to a hug from my dad. My jacket was my most prized possession, and I had one rule about it. I would never give it away. Not for money, not because someone thought it looked cool, not because I outgrew it. The only person I could ever imagine giving it to would be the person I married someday. As unrealistic as that sounded as an 18-year-old, the thought mattered to me, maybe because the jacket connected me to my father, maybe because it reminded me that some things were worth protecting. So on the last ball game of senior year, I wore it the same way I always did. The familiar weight of the black hoodie settled over my shoulders as I followed Chelsea through the crowded stadium. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass, popcorn, and the lingering sweetness of the concession stand's hot chocolate. Chelsea, meanwhile, had entirely different priorities. "I need to meet people before graduation," she announced as we climbed down the bleachers toward the field. "Interesting people." "You mean football players?" She shrugged. "Football players can be interesting." I raised an eyebrow. "Besides," she continued, brushing a strand of blonde hair behind her ear, "I'm going away to college soon. I want to experience life." Chelsea had always been braver than I was. She threw herself into conversations with strangers while I carefully observed from the sidelines. She chased opportunities while I analyzed all the reasons they might go wrong. I had turned 18 a few weeks earlier. I had never had a serious relationship. I hadn't even figured out what I wanted my life to look like after graduation. But I wasn't worried about that tonight. I wasn't looking for romance. I wasn't trying to reinvent myself before college applications and yearbook signatures turned high school into a memory. I just wanted to meet some interesting people. One final night beneath the stadium lights. One final football game. One final chance to discover that maybe the world outside Whisper Hills, California, was bigger than I had ever imagined. At the time, I had no way of knowing that before the night was over, I would meet someone who would change everything. Whisper Hills High School was the home team. Every spring, the final football game of the season drew practically the entire town to the stadium. Parents packed the bleachers with thermoses of coffee and blankets draped over their knees. Younger siblings chased each other beneath the stands while the marching band warmed up in the distance. This year, Sequim High School, a town about 5 miles north of Whisper Hills, had arrived in their rickety old school bus looking to beat us for the 3rd year in a row. Judging by the confidence of their players as they stepped onto the field, they thought they had a pretty good chance. Chelsea barely noticed the rivalry. Instead, she scanned the sidelines with the concentration of an investigative journalist working on the biggest story of her career. "You realize we're supposed to be covering the game for the newspaper," I reminded her. "We are covering the game," Chelsea replied. "I'm gathering information." "Information." She pointed discreetly toward the players stretching near the 50-yard line. "Potential interview subjects." I laughed despite myself. The truth was, there were plenty of attractive people on both teams. Football players had a way of carrying themselves with effortless confidence that made them difficult to ignore. Some of them joked with their teammates, others focused quietly on the game ahead. Chelsea offered commentary under her breath as though she were judging an academic competition instead of a football game. I adjusted the sleeves of my black hoodie and glanced around the crowded stadium. Students from Whisper Hills filled the home bleachers, cheering loudly and waving school colors. Across the field, Sequim supporters answered with chants of their own. For a moment, it felt like any other Friday night. One last football game. One last assignment for the school newspaper. One last evening before graduation pulled everyone in different directions. I had no idea that somewhere among the crowd, the person who would alter the course of my life had already arrived. Micah made a thoroughly disgusted face, his nose wrinkling as if Chelsea had just suggested licking the gym floor for scientific research. "Wait," he said, holding up a hand. "When you say you're going to interview them, do you mean interviewing them by actually talking to them one-on-one like a normal person? Or do you mean sitting on their lap and asking questions while batting your eyelashes?" Chelsea giggled mischievously, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well, I haven't completely ruled either option out yet," she admitted with a grin. "Journalism is all about adapting to the situation." Micah stared at her in disbelief. "That isn't journalism, it's a future lawsuit." "Relax," Chelsea said with a dramatic wave of her hand. "Either way, I'm getting a scoop tonight, whether it's 90 words or 9 inches. Chelsea is going to get her due. I've waited too long for this opportunity to walk away empty-handed. I might lose my V-card." "You sound like a supervillain explaining their evil plan," Micah muttered. Chelsea's grin widened. "Every great reporter has to be a little relentless. People don't just hand over the good stories, you have to chase them down." "By asking intelligent questions," Micah corrected. "Or," Chelsea replied thoughtfully, "through the strategic use of charm." Micah looked horrified. "No, absolutely not. There should never be a sentence that combines the words journalism and strategic use of charm." Chelsea laughed harder at his reaction. "Oh, come on, you're acting like I'm planning a major crime." Micah crossed his arms. "The fact that I can't immediately rule that out is exactly why I'm concerned." "Have a little faith in me," Chelsea said, still giggling. "By the end of tonight, I'll have the biggest story of the season." Micah shook his head, looking equal parts amused and appalled. "Chelsea, I don't know what's more disturbing, the fact that you're completely serious or the fact that part of me thinks this ridiculous plan might actually work." Chelsea flashed him a confident smile. "Trust me, Chelsea always gets the scoop or a hand up her panties." Micah let out an exaggerated groan. "That is disgusting," he declared, burying his face in his hands. "I am begging you to conduct your interviews like a normal human being." Chelsea laughed as she walked away. "No promises," she called over her shoulder. "History remembers the reporters who get results." "History also remembers the people who created ethical guidelines," Micah shouted after her. Chelsea simply waved without turning around. "Details." Chelsea nudged Micah with her elbow, an impish grin spreading across her face. "So," she asked, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "have you lost your V-card yet?" Micah nearly tripped over his own feet. "Chelsea," he sputtered, glancing around nervously, "you can't just ask people that." Chelsea shrugged. "Sure I can, I just did." Micah shook his head, his face turning pink. "No," he admitted quietly, "I haven't." Chelsea blinked in surprise. "Really?" Micah shoved his hands into the pockets of his jeans and stared down at the floor. "I've tried dating," he said with a small shrug, "but none of the girls at our high school seem to want anything to do with me." "That's ridiculous," Chelsea replied. Micah let out a self-deprecating laugh. "Apparently I'm too quiet, too short, too skinny, and I'm not into sports," he paused. At least those are the reasons I've heard. Chelsea frowned. Those are terrible reasons. Maybe, Micah said, but high school can be pretty shallow. He glanced over at her and offered a weak smile. So I've kind of accepted that it'll probably happen in college instead. Chelsea studied him for a moment before nudging him again, this time more gently. Micah, there's nothing wrong with being quiet, she said. And not every girl is looking for the captain of the football team. You're smart, you're kind, and you actually listen when people talk. That's rare. Micah looked skeptical. You really think so? Chelsea rolled her eyes. Please, half the people in this school have the emotional depth of a puddle after a light rainstorm. Despite himself, Micah laughed. College is different, Chelsea continued. You'll meet people from all kinds of backgrounds. Someone out there is going to appreciate you exactly as you are. Micah smiled faintly. I hope you're right. Chelsea grinned. I know I'm right. Besides, you've got plenty of time. It's not a race. Micah sighed dramatically. Thanks, Chelsea. You're welcome, she said, then her grin turned mischievous again. But if we're having this same conversation after graduation from college, I reserve the right to intervene. Micah groaned, and there goes the supportive moment. Chelsea laughed. Hey, I'm a woman of many talents. Micah shook his head with a smile. You're impossible. And yet, Chelsea replied proudly, you keep hanging out with me. One of life's greatest mysteries, Micah said as they continued down the hallway together. Chelsea glanced across the crowded gymnasium and immediately noticed a blonde-haired jock from the neighboring town staring in her direction. That guy is absolutely dressing me down with his eyes, Chelsea whispered, trying and failing to suppress a grin. Isn't he adorable? I wonder what he looks like without his shirt on. Micah adjusted the brim of his hat and gave her an unimpressed look. Chelsea. What? She asked innocently. I'm making observations. Those aren't observations, Micah replied dryly. Those are the kinds of comments that get you banned from the school newspaper. Chelsea laughed. You don't understand. This is quality investigative work. Micah shook his head. Why don't you go interview some people instead? Chelsea followed his gaze back toward the attractive athlete, who still seemed interested in whatever conversation he was having with his friends while occasionally glancing in their direction. Interviewing people, Chelsea repeated thoughtfully. Right. Micah smirked, the kind where you ask questions and write down the answers. Chelsea sighed dramatically. You take all the fun out of journalism. Someone has to maintain basic ethical standards, Micah replied. Chelsea straightened her shoulders and brushed invisible lint from her outfit. Fine, I'll conduct myself like a respectable reporter. Micah raised an eyebrow. That's the spirit. Chelsea grinned mischievously. But if Mr. Tall, blonde, and handsome happens to volunteer additional information, who am I to turn down a source? Micah pinched the bridge of his nose. I regret encouraging this. Chelsea laughed and pointed toward the bleachers. Stay here. I'm going to get the story of the night. Micah leaned against the wall with an amused smirk. I'll wait here, he said, and if the principal asks, I've never met you. Chelsea flashed him a thumbs up before heading off into the crowd. You're impossible, Micah called after her. Chelsea glanced back over her shoulder with a dazzling smile. And yet, life would be so boring without me. Chelsea looked at the blonde guy standing nearly 100 feet away across the practice field. I'll bet $50 that blonde over there is 8.5 inches. What do you guess? She said casually. Micah immediately choked on his Pepsi. Chelsea. What? She asked innocently. You cannot just say things like that. Chelsea laughed. Oh, come on, I usually win these things. These things. Oh yeah, these things. Micah stared at her. There shouldn't be enough of these things for you to have a winning record. Chelsea shrugged. It's an easy $50. Micah shook his head in disbelief. You are unbelievable. Do you want in on the bet or not? Micah sighed dramatically. Fine, 8.75. Chelsea pointed at him immediately. I'll tell you tomorrow. No changing your answer later. I won't. And I'll know if you're lying. Chelsea rolled her eyes. How exactly? Micah smirked. Your nose turns red. My nose does not turn red. It absolutely does. It does not. It does. Chelsea groaned. This is why nobody argues with you. Smart people don't. You're impossible. Chelsea grinned. Fine, I'll tell you tomorrow. She gathered her notebook and stood. Then her expression shifted into something more professional as she looked toward the football field. Remember to interview that interesting quarterback, Ayers, from the visiting sports team. Micah stood as well. We need an article about their scrimmage changes this season, Chelsea continued. I know, Micah said. I'm serious. So am I. Chelsea gave him a skeptical look. You forget one assignment and suddenly nobody trusts you. You've brought up that one missed interview for 3 months. Because it was important. Micah grabbed his notebook. And that's why I'm not forgetting Ayers. Together they started toward the practice field, where players were already gathering for the afternoon scrimmage. Tomorrow, Micah reminded her. Chelsea smiled. Tomorrow. Don't forget. I never forget when money's involved. Micah separated from Chelsea as she headed off toward the locker room tunnels, hopping to track down players for post-game interviews. Some athletes preferred speaking publicly in front of cameras. Others were more willing to talk one-on-one away from the crowds. Either way, Chelsea was determined to get a story. Micah had a different target in mind. The stadium was beginning to empty, but players from both teams still wandered across the field, talking to coaches, shaking hands, and celebrating. Spotting a tall athlete wearing the visiting team's colors, Micah hurried over. Excuse me, Micah called out, are you Ayers? The football player looked at him for a second before breaking into laughter. He smiled back. 2 years ago I was one of the running backs. Micah groaned. Seriously? Yeah, seriously. The running back pointed toward the tunnel leading away from the field. Ayers already left. Micah's shoulders slumped. Gone already? Afraid so. Damn it. Micah ran a hand through his hair and glanced around the stadium as if the quarterback might magically reappear. I need an interview, he muttered. The running back chuckled. Bad timing, kid. Did he seriously just leave? The player shrugged. We won, he probably wasn't interested in hanging around. Micah looked toward the exit. Any idea where he went? The running back grinned knowingly. Probably the house party on 4th Street. Micah blinked. There's a house party. There's always a house party after a win. The athlete laughed again. Especially after beating you guys. Micah rolled his eyes. Thanks, that helps a lot. Happy to be of service. The running back began walking backward toward his teammates. If you're trying to catch him, you'd better hurry. Micah sighed dramatically. You know, reporters have enough problems without star quarterbacks disappearing. Tough luck. The player flashed him a teasing smile. We won the game, we get to disappear if we want. Micah watched him jog away before looking toward the stadium exit. The interview wasn't completely dead yet. If Ayers really had gone to a party on 4th Street, there was still a chance. Not a great chance, but a chance. And for a journalist chasing a story, sometimes that was enough. Micah didn't waste another second. The moment the running back mentioned the party on 4th Street, he sprinted toward the bike rack outside the stadium. If Ayers was really there, Micah still had a chance to get his interview. A slim chance. But a chance. He threw a leg over his bike and began pedaling hard. The ride wasn't terrible under normal circumstances. 4th Street sat roughly 3 miles away. If he kept a good pace, he could make it in 20 or 30 minutes. Assuming nothing went wrong. Unfortunately, Micah had a terrible habit of thinking things like that out loud. Just don't rain, he muttered. The universe immediately took offense. A cold drop hit his forehead. Micah froze. No. Another drop. Then 3 more. No, no, no. Within seconds the sky opened. Rain came down in sheets so thick it looked like someone had tipped over an ocean above the town. Water hammered the road, rooftops, trees, and fields with astonishing force. Micah groaned. You have got to be kidding me. The dirt road ahead transformed almost instantly. Small puddles became streams. Streams became muddy rivers cutting across the road. His tires splashed through water deep enough to soak his shoes within moments. And then he remembered something. His poncho. His stupid, wonderful waterproof poncho. The one hanging safely at home. Wonderful, Micah muttered. Rainwater immediately flew into his mouth. He spat it back out. The storm showed no mercy. His shirt clung to his body. His jeans became heavier with every pedal stroke. Water dripped from his hair directly into his eyes, forcing him to blink constantly just to see where he was going. The wind wasn't helping either. Each gust shoved cold rain sideways into his face. Micah lowered his head and kept pedaling. If I die chasing a football interview, he shouted at nobody, Chelsea better write something nice about me. The storm responded by dumping even more water on him. Soon he was completely drenched. Not slightly wet. Not caught in a little rain wet. Absolutely soaked. Every inch of him. His hair hung flat against his forehead, water ran down the back of his neck, his shoes squished every time he pushed the pedals, even his backpack felt twice as heavy. The road ahead barely looked like a road anymore. It looked like a muddy river winding through the darkness. Yet Micah kept going. Because somewhere at the end of that miserable ride was a star quarterback. And if Ayers was actually at that party, Micah wasn't about to let a little thing like a biblical flood stop him from getting his interview. Even if he arrived looking less like a reporter and more like a drowned rat on a bicycle, he wouldn't fail Chelsea again. Micah had barely made it halfway from the stadium when things went from bad to significantly worse. I am not even a mile and a half out, he muttered through clenched teeth, rainwater running into his mouth mid-sentence. His shoes were completely ruined by now, squishing with every push of the pedals, waterlogged and heavy. His grip on the handlebars had gone slick from rain and exhaustion, fingers slipping each time he slightly adjusted his hands. The bike wobbled beneath him as the dirt road turned into a muddy, uneven mess. Then it happened fast. A rut hidden beneath the water. A sudden shift of balance. The front wheel dipped, caught wrong, and the entire bike lurched sideways. Well, Micah went down hard. The bike twisted with him, metal scraping against wet ground as he hit the dirt and slid a short distance, rain immediately soaking into his clothes even further. The impact knocked the breath out of him for a second, leaving him stunned, blinking up at the storm still hammering down as if nothing had changed. He groaned. Of course, he said weakly. Then he tried to move. That's when he realized the real problem. His pant leg had been dragged into the bike chain during the fall, twisted tightly and wedged in place. The fabric was pulled taut, caught deep in the mechanism. No, no, no. Micah shifted carefully, trying not to make it worse. But every movement only tightened the grip of the chain on his pants. The wheel was still slightly angled, jammed against the muddy ground. He grabbed at the fabric. Tugged. Nothing. Come on, he hissed, frustration cutting through the rain-soaked panic. Don't do this right now. He tried again, bracing one hand against the bike frame and pulling harder with the other, but the wet fabric refused to budge. It was stuck fast, tangled in the chain in a way that made every attempt feel worse than the last. Micah exhaled sharply, rain dripping off his eyelashes. This is unbelievable, he muttered to himself, voice rising slightly with disbelief and irritation. I'm chasing a quarterback, not getting defeated by a bike chain. He shifted carefully again, trying to find an angle, any angle, that would free his leg without tearing the fabric or making the chain bite deeper. But the more he pulled, the more obvious it became. He wasn't going anywhere yet. Not until he got himself out of this mess first. Micah kept tugging at his pant leg, breath coming faster now as frustration started to edge into panic. The chain wouldn't give. Every pull only made the fabric twist tighter and the rain made everything harder, slippery, heavy, uncooperative. Come on, he muttered, voice strained as he braced himself against the bike frame. Then, headlights. Bright, sudden, blinding. A car rounded the bend and pulled up right beside him, tires cutting through the flooded road and throwing a wave of muddy water straight up into the air. It splashed over Micah in an instant, soaking him all over again and forcing him to jerk back with a sharp gasp. Ay! He flinched, raising an arm instinctively to shield his face, but the light was too intense. The beams cut through the rain like searchlights, leaving him half-blinded, unable to see anything beyond the glare. The car slowed, then stopped. The door opened. A figure stepped out. "Hey, do you need some help?" a voice called over the storm. "I almost ran you over, are you okay?" Micah blinked hard, trying to focus, but all he could see was the silhouette of a guy probably around 18 or 19, standing in the blinding spill of headlights. Everything else was just shapes and rain and noise. Micah started, then squinted again. I can't see anything right now." He wiped his face with his sleeve, but it didn't help much. Water kept pouring down and the light kept cutting straight through him. "My bike's stuck," he added, voice raised over the storm, frustration and embarrassment mixing together. "My pant legs caught in the chain." He tugged again weakly, as if to prove the point, but it barely moved. The figure by the car took a cautious step closer. Okay, the guy said. "Don't pull it harder, you're just going to make it worse." Micah exhaled sharply, still half-blinded, still drenched, still stuck in the middle of the road, like the universe had decided this was the exact moment to test him. And for now, all he could do was wait for the stranger in the headlights to become visible enough to help. The stranger crouched down beside the bike without hesitation, rain running off the hood of his jacket as he leaned into the tangled chain. The brown-haired man stood about 6 feet tall and looked to be around 190 pounds, with a muscular build that was even more noticeable beneath his soaked, semi-sheer shirt. Rainwater clung to the expensive fabric, making it hang heavily against him. Despite the upscale shirt, he wore only a simple pair of shorts, giving his otherwise polished appearance an unexpectedly casual contrast. "All right, let me see," he said calmly, like this wasn't the first time he'd dealt with something like it. Micah stayed still, one hand still gripping the handlebars, the other hovering uselessly near his trapped pant leg. The headlights behind the stranger kept everything washed out in harsh white glare, making it hard to focus on anything clearly. The guy pulled a small tool from his pocket, something compact and worn, like he actually kept it around for moments exactly like this. "Don't pull," he said again, more firmly now. "I've got it." He worked carefully at the chain, easing the fabric out bit by bit instead of forcing it. The bike creaked slightly as he adjusted the angle, rain dripping off both of them in steady sheets. "There," he muttered after a moment, giving one final careful pry. The fabric slipped free. Micah let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his leg finally released from the chain. He shifted back slightly, flexing his knee experimentally like he didn't fully trust it yet. The stranger straightened up, wiping rain from his face with the back of his hand like it was nothing. "Yeah," he said with a small smile. "This used to happen to me all the time in junior high." Micah gave a short, exhausted laugh, still catching his breath. "Seriously?" "Oh yeah," the guy said. "That's why I started riding in shorts, learned that lesson the hard way." He glanced at the bike, then back at Micah. "You good now?" Micah nodded quickly, still soaked to the bone, still standing in the middle of a rainstorm like he'd been dropped into it. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, thanks, seriously." The stranger gave a casual nod, already stepping backward toward his car. "No problem," he said. "Try not to get yourself killed chasing whatever you're chasing out here." Micah huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. "I'll try." The guy smiled once more, then turned back toward his car, headlights still blazing through the storm as the rain kept pouring down around them. And just like that, Micah was alone again, soaked, shaken, but free to keep going. The guy had already started to get back into his car when he hesitated again, pausing with the door half open as the rain hammered down around them. For a second he just stood there, looking out at Micah through the blur of water and headlights. Then he shut the door, but didn't fully commit to leaving. The engine idled. A moment passed. Then the driver's door opened again. "Hey," the guy called out over the storm, raising his voice slightly. "Do you want a ride?" Micah blinked, rain dripping from his lashes, running down his face and soaking into his collar. He looked briefly down the road again, dark, flooded, empty except for the storm turning everything into moving water and mud. Then back at the car. At the headlights. At the stranger offering help. "Yeah," Micah said, a little breathless from everything that had already gone wrong. "Yeah, sure, that'd be nice, thank you." He stepped forward immediately, trying to steady his bike with one hand while pushing it toward the car with the other. The wheels barely rolled through the thick mud, dragging and slipping as if the road itself was trying to hold him back. Before he could properly maneuver it into place, the guy moved fast. Not rushed but efficient, like he'd done this kind of thing before. "Got it," he said. He reached out and took the bike from Micah's hands in one smooth motion, lifting it with ease despite the rain and weight. Micah let go, still catching his breath, standing there soaked and slightly stunned as the stranger carried the bike toward the back of the car. The red Mazda sports car gleamed under the stormlight, water streaming down its curved body in sheets. The trunk popped open with a mechanical click, revealing just enough space for the bike. The guy adjusted a couple of things inside, shifting what looked like a jacket and a bag to the side without hesitation. Then he guided the bike into the back hatch carefully, making sure it fit without scraping or damaging anything. "There," he said under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. He stepped back, wiped rain from his face, and closed the hatch with a firm push. The sound of it shutting was sharp against the storm. He turned back toward Micah, nodding toward the passenger's side. "All right," he said, "hop in before you turn into a puddle out here." Micah didn't need to be told twice. He moved quickly around the side of the car, rain still pounding down on him, already looking forward to being out of the storm for even a few minutes. Micah was shivering as he climbed into the passenger seat, his soaked clothes sticking uncomfortably to him as soon as he sank into the leather. The warmth inside the car felt almost unreal after the freezing storm outside, but it didn't fully reach him yet. His whole body was still shaking from the rain and the bike crash and the miles of miserable ride. The stranger shut his door and the sound of the storm dulled instantly, like the world had been pushed behind thick glass. Without saying much, the driver reached into the backseat, pulled out a towel and handed it over. "Dry yourself off," he said casually, "otherwise you're gonna stick to the leather." Micah let out a breath of relief and took it quickly. "Oh, thank you," he said, immediately pressing it to his face, wiping rain from his eyes first before rubbing it through his hair. "You're welcome," the stranger replied with a small, easy smile, like this was just another normal part of his day. A second later, the engine started with a low, smooth hum. The car pulled forward, tires cutting through the flooded road with more control than anything Micah had experienced in the last hour. The windshield wipers began their steady rhythm. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the driver glanced over briefly, still focused on the road ahead. "So where were you going?" he asked. Micah adjusted the towel around his shoulders, still catching his breath from everything that had happened. "4th Street," he said. "I've got to catch one of the jocks for an interview." He gave a short, tired exhale. "I work for the newspaper for the losing team." The stranger let out a small huff of amusement, almost sympathetic. "That's rough." "3rd year in a row," Micah added, shaking his head slightly. "Feels like a curse or something." The driver nodded once, eyes still forward. "Yeah," he said, "that would get old." Micah leaned back a little, finally starting to warm up, though his hands were still cold. "I'm not really into sports," he admitted after a beat, "so I don't really care who wins, it's just my job." The stranger glanced at him again briefly, then back at the road. "Fair enough," he said simply. The car moved steadily through the storm, headlights slicing a clean path forward as 4th Street slowly drew closer through the rain. The stranger kept driving, the wipers sweeping back and forth in a steady rhythm as rain hammered the windshield. The interior of the car felt almost unreal compared to what Micah had just been through: warm air, dry seats, the soft hum of a well-maintained engine cutting smoothly through the storm. Micah leaned back slightly, still wrapped in the towel, letting himself breathe for the first time in what felt like an hour. His eyes drifted around the interior despite himself, taking in the clean leather seats, the subtle dashboard lighting, the quiet precision of everything. This has to cost at least 50 grand, he thought, probably more. Maybe more like 100. He wasn't sure. "Is this a Mazda?" Micah asked after a moment, curiosity slipping through his exhaustion. "It is," the stranger said with a small smile, keeping his eyes on the road. Micah gave a short, impressed nod. "I've heard of these," he said. "Nice cars, I've just never been in one." He glanced down at the towel in his hands, then out at the rain-blurred world beyond the window. My grandmother drives a 1972 Ford, he added. It's older than the library downtown. That earned a quiet smirk from the driver. Sounds like it's seen some things, he said. Micah shrugged lightly. It has more personality than most people I know. The stranger let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh. Well, he said, adjusting his grip on the wheel as the car moved through a deeper patch of water, not all of us can afford the best, but honestly, as long as your ride gets you where you need to go, that's really all you can hope for. Micah glanced over at him for a second, taking that in. Yeah, he said slowly, I guess that's true. Outside, the storm kept raging, but inside the Mazda everything felt steady, controlled, almost detached from the chaos. 4th Street was still ahead, somewhere in the rain. And for now, Micah wasn't stuck on the side of the road anymore. 4th Street finally came into view through the rain-streaked windshield, blurred neon signs, dark houses packed closer together, and distant flashes of movement suggesting the party Micah had been chasing. Micah leaned forward slightly, recognizing the street immediately. Hey, this is it, he said quickly, 4th Street. The driver didn't slow down. In fact, he kept going. Micah blinked. They passed the intersection. Then the block. Then the turnoff completely. Micah straightened in his seat. He started, confused now. I'm supposed to be back over there. The stranger glanced at him briefly, almost casually. Those parties are boring, he said. You could interview me instead. Micah let out a short, disbelieving laugh. That's not how this works, he said. I need Ayers, the quarterback. The driver smirked faintly. Doesn't give interviews, he said. Micah frowned. Chelsea, the newspaper editor, really wants his perspective, he insisted, even just a quote something. The car continued forward, smooth and steady, as 4th Street disappeared behind them in the rain. The driver exhaled lightly through his nose. He's my best friend, so you could say I know Ayers personally. He won't give you an interview. I talked to him 10 minutes ago. You might say we're very tight. Micah turned toward him now, fully focused. You just talked to him. Yeah, the driver said simply. I gave him a ride to the game earlier. Micah stared at him. The stranger kept his eyes on the road. He doesn't do interviews, he added, and he wouldn't talk to a loser like you. Micah stiffened slightly at that. The driver immediately shrugged. No offense, he added almost casually, that's what he would call you. A pause. Then a beat later, like it was an afterthought. You're not a loser, you're just poor. The car rolled slowly through the rain until it turned off the main road and into an abandoned parking lot on 7th Street. It was the kind of place that looked like it had once belonged to something important, maybe a small shopping center or an old office building. But now it was just cracked asphalt, broken streetlights, and weeds pushing up through the edges of the pavement. At 9 o'clock on a Friday night, with the storm beating down hard enough to blur the world outside, it felt even more deserted than it should have. The red Mazda came to a smooth stop near the center of the lot. The engine idled for a moment. Then cut off. Silence rushed in immediately, filled only by the sound of rain hammering the roof and windows like a constant drumbeat. Micah sat still for a second, towel still draped around his shoulders, watching water stream down the windshield in uneven sheets. The headlights illuminated nothing but falling rain and empty space ahead. He shifted slightly in his seat. Are you going to ask me some questions? The driver said, turning his head toward him. Micah blinked, caught off guard by how calm he sounded in a place like this. Micah said, glancing out at the parking lot again. Sure. He hesitated, then reached into his bag and pulled out a small notepad that was slightly damp at the edges. His pen clicked once before he started writing. Okay, Micah said, trying to slip back into reporter mode. What position do you play? The driver leaned back slightly in his seat, one arm resting on the wheel, looking almost amused. In freshman year, he said, I was the kicker. Micah wrote that down quickly. The driver continued. Last year I was a running back. Micah looked up briefly. Wait, you switched positions. Coach liked experimenting, he said with a small shrug. Turns out I'm faster than I look. Micah nodded and wrote that down too, rain still rattling against the car like it was trying to get in. All right, Micah said, flipping a page. So, what do you think was the key to tonight's win? The driver let out a short laugh. You're really doing this, he said. Micah looked up. Yeah, I have to. The driver studied him for a second, then shrugged. Defense, he said simply. We read their offense early. They kept trying to push long plays down the sideline instead of adjusting to the field conditions. Micah scribbled quickly. So you were anticipating their strategy, he asked. More like they made it obvious, the driver replied. Wet field, heavy rain, bad visibility, they still tried to play like it was a dry stadium game. That's how you lose games you should have won. Micah nodded again, focused now, pen moving steadily. Any specific moment that turned the game around? The driver thought for a second. Second quarter, he said, they fumbled on their own 20. After that, their confidence dropped. You can feel it when a team starts second-guessing itself. Micah wrote faster. What about your team, he asked. Anything you did differently that helped secure the win? The driver exhaled slowly, eyes briefly flicking toward the windshield as rain slid down in thick waves. We didn't panic, he said. That's really it. People underestimate how much games are mental. Everyone wants to talk about strength or speed, but if your head isn't steady, none of those matters. Micah paused for a moment, then nodded. That's actually pretty insightful, he admitted. The driver gave a faint smirk. I try. Micah flipped another page, now more confident. Last question, he said. What's your take on the team's performance this season overall? The driver leaned his head back slightly against the seat. We're improving, he said. Not where we want to be yet, but better than last year. Still making mistakes, still learning. Micah wrote that down carefully, then looked up again. Outside, the rain hadn't slowed at all. It kept pounding the parking lot, filling puddles between cracks in the asphalt. The empty lot around them felt cut off from everything else in the world. Micah hesitated for a second. So, he said slowly, you really know Ayers personally? The driver glanced at him. Yeah, he said, pretty well. Micah nodded, then looked back down at his notes, trying not to overthink it. The rain kept falling. And the interview kept going. The driver kept one hand loosely on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift as the rain blurred the parking lot lights into soft, wavering halos. For a moment he just looked at Micah, really looked at him, in that quiet, assessing way people do when they realize they're not talking to someone who fits the usual expectations. You really don't watch the game, do you? He asked finally. Micah shook his head, still flipping through his damp notepad like it was the most normal thing in the world to be doing an interview in an abandoned parking lot during a storm. Not really, he admitted. I usually read a book instead. Sports isn't really my thing. Chelsea's into it though. She's kind of into the football players more than the sport, honestly. A faint smirk crossed the driver's face at that. Micah shrugged slightly, continuing without much hesitation. I was reading Morris earlier, he said. It's a classic. It's a lot more interesting than watching a bunch of guys tackle each other over a ball for 3 hours. The driver let out a short laugh through his nose. So you think football's just guys tackling each other? I mean, Micah said, tilting his head like he was considering it seriously. From a distance it kind of looks like organized chaos. I don't really get the obsession. The driver glanced at him again, eyebrows lifting slightly. That's a bold take for someone interviewing players. I'm not trying to offend anyone, Micah said quickly, then added honestly, it just doesn't connect for me. I don't really see the appeal of it compared to books or anything else, really. The driver shook his head, still amused but not annoyed. You're definitely not the target audience, he said. Micah leaned back a little in the seat, towel still draped around his shoulders, finally starting to warm up as the car heater worked through the chill in his bones. Yeah, he said, I've noticed. The driver's attention shifted for a moment, eyes flicking toward Micah as if reassessing him. Did you say you're reading Morris? He asked, slower this time. Micah nodded, adjusting the towel around his shoulders. Yeah. The driver tilted his head slightly, as if something had clicked into place. Isn't that a gay book? He said. Micah blinked once. Yeah, he replied, as if that alone should have answered the question. The driver gave a short, knowing huff of a laugh. I thought so, he said. So you read queer stuff. Micah frowned slightly, not quite sure where the conversation was going anymore. I just read books, he said simply. The driver glanced him over for a second, quick, casual but more pointed now than before. I should have guessed, he said. The way you dress, you're definitely leaning left if you know what I mean. Micah's brow furrowed. What does that even mean? He asked, genuinely confused rather than defensive. The rain kept hammering the roof, steady and loud, filling the silence that followed his question. The driver didn't answer immediately. He just kept his eyes on the road ahead, jaw slightly set, like he was deciding how far to push the conversation or whether he cared enough to explain himself at all. The car continued forward through the storm, headlights cutting through the rain in long white streaks, while the space between them tightened with an awkward, uncertain edge. The driver glanced over again, rain light flickering across his face as the windshield wipers kept their steady rhythm. Are you out to anybody, he asked more bluntly now, or are you still in your closet? Micah stared at him for a second, genuinely thrown. I have clothes in my closet, he said slowly, like he was trying to work out if this was some kind of joke, but I'm not in the closet. The driver let out a short breath, half laugh, half disbelief. You know what I mean, he said. Are you hiding it? Does anyone know you're gay? Micah's expression tightened slightly at that. I'm not gay, he said. A pause. The driver looked at him again, eyebrows lifting just a bit. Really, he said, then what are you? Micah turned his head toward the passenger window, watching rain stream down the glass in thick, uneven lines. It's none of your business, actually, he said flatly. The car rolled forward through the storm, engine steady, tires humming over wet pavement. The driver nodded once, like he'd been gently corrected into silence. Okay, he said after a beat, hint taken. He didn't push further after that. Just kept driving, letting the rain fill the space where the conversation had been. The driver glanced over again, one hand steady on the wheel as the rain blurred the streetlights into long, smeared streaks. So, he said casually, do you have a girlfriend or are you just prudish? Micah stiffened slightly in his seat, shifting the towel around his shoulders like it suddenly felt too heavy. No, he said quickly, I don't have a girlfriend. The driver nodded like that was useful information. What about a boyfriend? He added, tone light but direct, or are you on the DL? Micah turned his head sharply now, eyebrows drawn together. That's not, he started, then stopped himself, exhaling through his nose. His face had gone a little red, partly from the heat in the car, partly from irritation, partly from the fact that this entire conversation had taken a direction he didn't want it to take. I don't have a boyfriend either, he said more firmly, then added quieter but sharper, can we not do this? The driver held up one hand slightly, like he was backing off. All right, he said, fair. A beat passed between them, filled only by the wipers and the steady hum of the engine. Micah looked back out the window, jaw set, watching the rain streak across the glass in uneven lines. The driver kept his eyes forward this time. Didn't mean to make it weird, he said after a moment, just asking. Micah didn't answer right away. Outside, the road kept sliding past under the storm, empty and wet and indifferent to the conversation happening inside the car. The driver pulled the car out of the abandoned parking lot, tires rolling through standing water as they rejoined the main road. Micah glanced out the window, still half expecting a turn back toward 4th Street, the lights, the noise, the party he'd been chasing for an interview that now felt increasingly out of reach. Instead, the Mazda continued south. Not fast, not erratic, just steady, deliberate. Micah shifted in his seat. I thought we were going back to 4th Street, he said again, trying to make sense of it. The driver kept his eyes on the road. You've got your interview, he said. You talked to a football player already. That wasn't, Micah started, then stopped himself, frustrated. I still need Ayers. The driver didn't respond immediately. The rain filled the silence, tapping sharply against the roof. Then he asked casually, almost conversationally. How good are you at keeping secrets? Micah blinked. What? The driver glanced over just briefly, then back to the road. I said, he repeated, how good are you at keeping secrets? Micah frowned, thrown off by the shift. I don't know, he admitted. I've never really had to keep a secret before. A beat. The driver let out a small amused sound. Damn, he said, you really are a prude. Micah straightened slightly. What does that even have to do with? Do you pray to God too? The driver added, cutting in with a low laugh. The question hung in the car for a second longer than it should have, light on the surface but edged with something harder underneath. The driver chuckled to himself, shaking his head slightly as he kept driving south through the rain. Micah looked out the window, now less certain about where they were going, or why the conversation kept steering into places he didn't fully understand. The rain kept coming down in thick sheets as the car moved steadily along the darker stretch of road, the city lights thinning behind them. The wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm, almost hypnotic in the quiet between them. The driver glanced back over his shoulder at Micah again, this time more directly. If I ask you something, he said, tone suddenly more serious, you have to give me your word you won't tell anyone. Micah frowned uneasy now. What kind of question? He asked. The driver's grip tightened slightly on the wheel. If you don't keep it a secret, he said, voice flattening just a little, I'll beat you up, or I'll run you over with my car. Micah immediately shifted back in his seat, putting a little distance between them, eyes widening. Okay, what? He said, alarmed now. That's not. Why would you even say that? The driver let out a short laugh, like he found the reaction amusing. Relax, he said, I'm messing with you. Micah didn't look convinced. The driver waved a hand slightly, as if brushing it off. Do we have a deal? He asked again, lighter this time. You don't tell anyone. Micah hesitated. Rain streaked across the windshield, the road stretched ahead, empty and wet. Fine, Micah said cautiously, I promise. A beat passed. The driver nodded once, satisfied, then leaned back into his seat as the car continued forward. Silence returned for a moment, just the hum of the engine and the rain. Then, as if nothing strange had happened at all, he spoke again. So, he said casually, do you want to go home or do you want to go to a hotel? Micah stared at him, still trying to figure out whether any of this was normal, or whether he had just made a promise he didn't fully understand. Micah noticed it before he could fully name it. The car was still moving, the rain was still falling, the heater was still on. But something in his body had shifted anyway. It started small, just a tightening in his chest, like the air in the car had gotten slightly thinner without warning. He adjusted the towel on his lap, then realized his fingers were colder than they should have been. He swallowed. Home or a hotel? The question from earlier echoed again, but now it didn't feel casual. It felt like it had weight he didn't fully understand. Micah exhaled slowly through his nose. I said home, he reminded himself quietly. The driver didn't respond right away. The silence stretched. Micah glanced out the window. The houses outside were dim shapes behind rain-streaked glass. Everything felt slightly too far away, like he was separated from it by something thicker than glass. His breathing shifted without permission. A little faster. A little shallower. He loosened the towel from around his shoulders, suddenly too warm, then immediately too cold again. Hey, he said, voice quieter than he intended. Can we just slow down for a second? The driver glanced over briefly. You okay? Micah nodded too fast. Yeah, I'm fine, just can you slow down? The car eased slightly, but the motion didn't help. Micah pressed his hand to his chest without thinking, like he was trying to physically hold everything in place. The feeling wasn't just fear, it wasn't just confusion. It was everything stacking at once. The storm, the crash, the ride, the questions, the jokes, the sudden shifts in tone, the hotel comment he still didn't understand, the secrecy thing, the way the conversation kept moving without him being able to predict where it would go. His breathing got sharper. Okay, he said more to himself now. Okay, I'm fine, I'm fine. But his body didn't agree. His heartbeat felt too loud, his throat felt tight, his hands wouldn't stay still. The driver noticed now. Hey, he said again, more focused, look at me for a second. Micah tried, but it was hard to pull his attention away from everything at once. I don't, Micah started, then stopped, swallowing hard. I don't feel good. All right, the driver said immediately, voice changing, less teasing now, more steady. You're okay, you're just in the car, you're safe. Micah shook his head slightly. I can't. His breath caught. The words didn't finish. His chest tightened further and suddenly it felt like the inside of the car was too small even though it wasn't. Even though it was just a normal car, even though nothing was actually closing in. He tried again, but the sentence broke apart. The driver slowed the car more and pulled gently toward the side of the road. Okay, he said firmly but calmly, we're stopping, you're not going anywhere right now. The car came to a full stop. Rain continued outside, but inside the world narrowed. Micah leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, head dipping as he tried to control his breathing. I'm fine, he insisted again, but it came out shaky, less convincing even to himself. No, you're not, the driver said not unkindly, and that's okay. Micah shut his eyes for a second. His chest rose too fast. Fell too fast. He swallowed hard again. He started then stopped, his voice dropped, I don't know what's happening. The driver didn't move closer, didn't touch him, just stayed where he was. You're overwhelmed, he said simply, that's it, breathe slower, don't fight it. Micah tried. It didn't work at first. Then slowly, unevenly, his breathing started to come back into rhythm though it still shook at the edges. The rain kept falling outside. The car stayed parked. And Micah, still shaken, sat trying to convince his body that it was no longer in danger, even if nothing around him had actually changed. The driver watched him for a moment after Micah's breathing finally started to steady again, the car still idling on the side of the rain-soaked road. The storm outside hadn't eased, but inside the car things had settled into a quieter, heavier kind of silence. Micah sat back slowly, still tense, still trying to get his body fully under control. His hands were clenched loosely in his lap now instead of shaking, but his shoulders hadn't quite dropped yet. The driver tilted his head slightly, studying him. Then, as if continuing a completely normal conversation, he said, "Are you a virgin or something?" Micah froze. "What?" he said immediately, voice sharper than he meant it to be. The driver shrugged one shoulder. "Because normally when I ask girls to go to a hotel," he said casually, "they don't start breathing up 90% of the oxygen in my car." Micah's face went red almost instantly. I wasn't," he started, then stopped, realizing how little control he had over the situation or how he was being interpreted. The driver gave a small, almost amused nod. "Okay," he said, "I'll take that as a yes." Micah sat back harder against the seat, staring forward now instead of at him, jaw tight. The driver drummed his fingers lightly on the wheel once. "All right," he continued, as if making a decision out loud. "Since you won't choose, I'll choose for you." Micah turned his head sharply. "What does that mean?" The driver didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled the car back onto the road, merging smoothly into the rain like nothing had happened. "You said home earlier," he said simply, "so I'll take you home." A pause. Then quieter, almost like an afterthought. "And maybe you stop interviewing people in abandoned parking lots during storms with strangers you just met." Micah didn't respond immediately. The car continued forward through the rain, headlights cutting a steady path through the dark, as the conversation shifted into something less sharp but still unsettling in a different way. The stranger kept driving further south, rain still hammering the windshield in heavy sheets as the road stretched into darker, quieter stretches of the city. Micah sat in the passenger seat, still wrapped in the damp towel, watching unfamiliar streets slide past. The warmth of the car had started to calm him, but the uncertainty hadn't fully gone away yet. Then the glow of a large sign appeared ahead through the rain. "Hilton." Micah straightened immediately. The car slowed, then turned into the entrance drive. "Wait," Micah said quickly, "this isn't my home, I don't live here." The driver glanced over at him, expression flattening in a way that made Micah feel like he'd just missed something obvious. "Of course not, doofus," he said. Micah blinked. "What?" The driver rolled his eyes slightly, pulling the car under the hotel's covered drop-off area. "I said get out of the car," he replied, "before it starts raining again." Micah looked between him and the hotel doors. "I didn't ask you to bring me to a hotel," he said, a little flustered now. "I said I was going home." "And you did," the driver said casually. "Eventually, just not yet." Micah hesitated, still not moving. I don't have a room here. The driver sighed like this was the simplest thing in the world. Then you go inside and get one, he said. It's a hotel, not a philosophy problem. Micah frowned. This is weird. The driver gave him a quick side glance. You got stuck in a bike chain in a storm and ended up in my car, he said. We passed weird about 10 miles ago. Micah opened his mouth, then closed it again. A beat passed. Are you sure about this? He asked. The driver shrugged. I'm sure you're not staying in my car all night, he said, then softer but still blunt, go inside, reporter. Micah finally reached for the door handle. Why are you helping me? He asked suddenly. The driver paused. For the first time, he didn't answer immediately. Then he said, because you'd keep following your story in the rain until you broke something worse than your bike. Micah looked at him for a second, unsure what to say to that. Okay, he said quietly. He pushed the door open. The stranger walked straight into the hotel lobby, as if he belonged there. Micah followed a step behind him, still damp, still confused, trailing faint water onto the polished floor as the warmth of the building wrapped around them. The contrast from the storm outside was almost disorienting, soft lighting, quiet music, dry air that made everything feel suddenly too still. At the front counter, the stranger leaned in casually. I'd like one room, please. The desk clerk smiled automatically. Of course, sir, how many beds? Just one, the stranger said without hesitation, queen size. Micah stepped forward immediately, alarmed. Wait, no, that's not, I can just. But the stranger didn't even look at him, he just lifted a hand slightly, not aggressive, just final. Relax, he muttered, sign here. Before Micah could fully process what was happening, the stranger slid a card across the counter. An American Express Platinum Charge card, sleek, heavy-looking, as if it had never been declined in its life. The clerk's expression changed instantly. Of course, sir, he said smoothly. Would you like room service or any food? The kitchen closes at 11, but we can always make exceptions for our exceptional guests. The stranger gave a faint nod. Just charge it. Micah stared at him. You can't just, he started, then lowered his voice. You didn't have to do that. The stranger finally glanced at him. You were getting soaked in a storm, he said simply. This is easier. Micah frowned. That's not an answer. It is, the stranger replied, you just don't like it. The clerk handed back the card with a practiced smile, already preparing the key. Room 614, he said, elevators are to your right. The stranger took the key, without looking away from Micah. Come on, he said. Micah hesitated. I don't even know your name, he said quietly. A pause. The stranger gave a small, unreadable half-smile. Then don't worry about it, he said, it's just for tonight. Micah didn't move at first. Then, reluctantly, he followed as the stranger turned toward the elevators, keys in hand, leading him deeper into the hotel like this was the most normal ending to the most chaotic night of his life. The stranger unlocked the hotel room and stepped inside first, flicking on a few lights. The room brightened gradually, soft lamps revealing a clean, standard hotel layout, neutral walls, a neatly made queen bed, a small desk, and a television across from the bed. He dropped the keycard on the table without ceremony. If you want to take a shower, you can, he said casually, already moving toward the room's seating area. It's through there, towels are next to the sink. Micah stood just inside the doorway for a second longer than he meant to, dripping faintly onto the carpet, still taking in the fact that he was in a hotel room he hadn't planned to be in with someone he barely knew. The stranger, meanwhile, turned the television on and flopped back onto the edge of the bed as if it belonged to him, remote already in hand. Micah shifted awkwardly. Oh, thanks, he said. No real response, just a distracted nod from the stranger as he started flipping through channels. Micah lingered another second, then nodded to himself like he'd made a decision. Okay. He walked into the bathroom and closed the door behind him. The sound of the TV became muffled immediately, replaced by the quiet echo of the bathroom tile, running faucet, and the faint hum of ventilation. Micah stood there for a moment, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He looked exhausted, rain-soaked, hair flattened, clothes clinging awkwardly, eyes still a little unfocused from everything that had happened. For a second he just breathed. Then he turned on the shower. Water hissed to life, steam beginning to rise almost immediately as the bathroom filled with warmth. Micah hesitated only briefly before stepping out of his wet clothes, folding them loosely to the side and carefully stepping into the shower. The water hit him hard at first, hot, steady, and grounding. And for the first time since the storm started, there was no rain, no motion, and no rushing road. Just stillness. Micah stood under the steady shower stream with his eyes shut tight, fingers jammed into his ears to block the water from trickling inside. The sensation always made him squirm, so he kept his hands in place while the hot spray beat down over his shoulders and chest. He turned slowly to rinse the back of his head, water cascading over his skin, and froze when he opened his eyes. A completely naked stranger stood right in front of him inside the stall. Micah's mouth opened to scream, but the man who had given him a ride during the rainstorm clamped a firm hand over his lips and shoved him backward until his spine hit the tiled wall. The stranger's body pressed close, trapping Micah in place. One large palm stayed sealed over Micah's mouth while the other wrapped his shoulders. Micah had never been kissed, never touched anyone, never even had a hand job before this moment. His virgin body reacted instantly to the unfamiliar grip. His knees buckled slightly. The stranger gives Micah a hand job in the shower. Scene retracted, read extended version on Wattpad. Without a word, the stranger rinsed his hand under the spray, then reached for the shampoo bottle. He poured a small amount into his palm and worked it through Micah's wet hair, massaging the scalp in gentle circles. Micah stayed pressed against the wall, still catching his breath, watching the man's movements. Once the suds were rinsed away, the stranger stepped back, opened the shower door and walked out, leaving Micah alone under the running water with his heart still racing. The entire encounter had lasted only minutes, yet every second replayed in Micah's mind. His legs felt weak, his skin flushed from both the heat of the shower and the shock of what had just happened. He could still feel the ghost of that firm grip around him, the way the stranger had controlled the pace without hesitation. Water continued to pour over him, washing away the evidence, but the memory clung tighter than any soap. Micah's breathing slowly steadied. He kept his back against the tiles for support, fingers finally slipping from his ears. The stranger's sudden appearance and equally sudden departure left a strange mix of confusion and lingering arousal in his body. He was now soft again, twitched faintly at the recollection of those 15 strokes. He wondered who the man was, why he had chosen to touch him like that, and whether he would ever see him again after the rainstorm ride. Steam filled the small bathroom, curling around Micah's bare form. He reached for the soap with shaky hands and began washing the rest of his body, trying to focus on the simple task. Every glide of his own fingers over his skin reminded him of the stranger's touch. His nipples tightened under the spray, sensitive from the earlier stimulation. He avoided touching himself, afraid another stiffy would form too quickly. Outside the shower, the hotel remained quiet. The stranger had left the hotel shower, no explanation, only the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the steam. Micah finished rinsing, turned off the water, and stepped out onto the mat. He grabbed a towel and dried himself slowly, replaying the scene once more. The hand over his mouth, the firm strokes, it all felt surreal, like something that could only happen in a dream. Micah wrapped the towel around his waist and stared at his reflection in the fogged mirror. The questions hung in the humid air as he opened the door and stepped into the cooler hallway beyond. Micah turned off the water and stepped out of the shower, wrapping a towel tightly around himself as steam drifted out behind him. The bathroom felt warmer now. Quieter in a way that made everything outside it seem further away than it should have been. He dried his hair quickly, still processing the last hour in fragments: storm, bike crash, hotel lobby, room key, and questions he didn't fully understand. When he opened the bathroom door and stepped back into the main room, the scene had shifted slightly. The stranger was standing near the bed, phone to his ear, speaking in a relaxed tone like the entire night was completely normal. "Yeah, of course," he said into the phone. "The rain got too bad. No, it's all right. I'll see you tomorrow." A pause. "No, I'm not doing anything important. I'm just seeking shelter until it lets up." Micah stopped just inside the doorway, towel still around his shoulders, listening without meaning to. "Okay," the stranger said. "Yeah, you too. Good night, Izzy." He ended the call and dropped the phone onto the bed. Then he looked over. "Oh, you're done with the shower, good." Micah blinked. The stranger shrugged slightly, like it was nothing. "It was just a woman, you know," he added casually. "You know how it is, women get worried if it rains like 1/18 of a centimeter." Micah stared at him for a second. "That's not a measurement," he said. The stranger gave him a look like Micah had missed the point entirely. "It is if you're dramatic enough about it," he replied. Micah exhaled through his nose, still standing there with wet hair and a towel around his shoulders. "Do have a girlfriend," he repeated, slower now, like he was checking the logic of everything that had happened tonight. The stranger nodded once. "We're not exclusive, but yes." Micah glanced around the room again, the single bed, the late-night hotel lighting, the storm still pressing against the windows. "And you brought me here." The stranger shrugged, sitting down on the edge of the bed like it was no big deal. "You needed a dry place," he said simply. "This is a dry place." Micah didn't answer immediately. He just stood there for a moment, trying to decide whether the night was getting more normal or less. Micah just stood there by the hallway until the strange guy got up off the mattress and walked over to Micah as he pushed him across the room. Micah fell backwards onto the mattress as the guy straddled him. "Is this okay?" the stranger said, sitting on Micah, staring down at him. Micah's heart was beating so fast he felt like Bugs Bunny. "Yeah," Micah croaked. The stranger looked down at Micah on the bed while he stripped off his pants. "During the entire game I was so hard. My girlfriend is one of those abstinence freaks who wants to wait till marriage. Fuck that. Are we going to get this on the road or do you want to go home to mommy?" Micah ended up sitting back on the edge of the mattress without fully meaning to, his legs giving him a place to go when his brain couldn't quite decide what to do next. The room felt too warm again, too bright, too close. He leaned back, catching himself with one hand on the bed, then fully sat down, staring forward like he was trying to anchor himself somewhere stable. The stranger noticed immediately. The energy in the room shifted again, but not toward pushing, toward observation, like he was recalculating what he was seeing. "Hey," the stranger said more quietly now, "you okay?" Micah swallowed. "I don't know," he admitted. That answer seemed to land differently than anything before it. The stranger didn't move closer. Instead, he took a step back from the bed entirely, giving space on purpose now. "All right," he said, "then we're not doing anything, just sit there." Micah nodded faintly, still not fully steady. The stranger glanced away toward the window, then back. "You're not in trouble," he added like he wanted that to be clear. "Just breathe, that's it." The rain outside hit the glass harder for a moment, filling the silence between them, but the room itself finally stopped feeling like it was closing in. Micah lay frozen on the mattress as the older teenager who had picked him up in the rain moved first. Micah loses his virginity to the stranger. Scene retracted, red extended scene on Wattpad. "Relax," the stranger ordered, voice low. "If you don't relax it won't work." Micah tried, but his body stayed rigid. The pain hit instantly. Micah shouted into the mattress, the hand on the middle of Micah's back pressed down firmly. "I'm fine," Micah groaned through gritted teeth. The stranger asked once more to be sure. Micah repeated the same shaky words. "Did I hurt you?" He leaned down and saw Micah's wet eyes. "Why are you crying?" Micah sniffled. "It wasn't like I thought it was going to be." The stranger sat on the edge of the mattress. "What did you hope it would be?" "I thought it would be with someone I cared about." The stranger took out a warm towel and quietly began cleaning up the mess. He stripped the soiled sheet from the bed, gathered it up and replaced it with a fresh one, smoothing the clean fabric carefully across the mattress. Then he reached for a large blanket. Without saying much, he wrapped it gently around Micah, tucking it securely around his shoulders to keep him warm. Once he was satisfied that Micah was comfortable, he stepped back and looked over the room, making sure everything was in order. The stranger nodded, quiet for a moment. "I have to go, my family's going to wonder where I am. You okay here by yourself?" Micah nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine, you can go." The stranger asked again to be sure. Micah gave the same answer. "Okay," the stranger said. He pulled on his clothes, then placed a small photo of himself on the bed. "Use this for the article, you're a really good reporter. I think I got the scoop though." He laughed once. "Drink some cranberry juice and put salts in the bath, it helps with the soreness." Before leaving, he added, "Don't tell anyone about this or I'll beat you up." Then he walked out, leaving Micah alone on the warm mattress with the photo and the quiet room. Micah stayed face down on the bed long after the door clicked shut. The room felt too quiet, the air thick with the smell of sweat and lube. His ass throbbed with a deep raw ache that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Every small shift sent fresh reminders of what had just happened, how the stranger's cock had stretched him open, or how the condom had filled while Micah stayed empty inside. Micah's first experience had left him confused more than anything else. There had been physical closeness, but there had been no kiss and almost no emotional intimacy. The 18-year-old boy hadn't asked Micah what he wanted or tried to make the moment feel mutual. He simply pushed Micah down and took control, doing what he wanted. At one point he asked Micah if he wanted to stop, but there was still a profound lack of tenderness or connection between them. Afterward the boy stayed and took care of Micah, which only made Micah's feelings harder to understand. He didn't know if he felt used because the boy hadn't shown any real affection toward him, yet he couldn't say the experience had been entirely without care afterward. Mostly Micah felt exposed and unsettled. He kept wondering why something so physically close could leave him feeling so emotionally alone. The jock Micah had spent an hour with at the Hilton hadn't used him. It had been completely consensual. The guy had checked in with Micah several times beforehand and during the experience, making sure he was comfortable and still wanted to continue. There had been mutual participation, but emotionally it had felt clinical and mechanical. Micah had experienced pleasure, but he could tell his partner had enjoyed himself far more than he had. Looking back, Micah couldn't call it a bad or harmful experience. It had simply been a pretty lousy first time, leaving him wishing there had been more warmth, connection, and intimacy. He rolled onto his side and winced. The photo the stranger left behind lay on the pillow. Micah picked it up with shaky fingers. The guy looked younger in the picture, smiling at some party, nothing like the intense expression he'd worn while inside Micah. Micah's eyes stung again. He had pictured his first time differently: slow kisses, someone whispering his name, maybe even love. Instead, he slept with a stranger from behind and a warning not to talk. His legs felt weak when he finally stood. He limped to the tiny bathroom attached to the room and turned on the shower. Hot water hit his skin and he hissed, but the heat helped loosen the tight muscles in his lower back. He braced both hands on the tile and let the spray run down his spine, over the handprint the stranger had left on his hip. Memories kept flashing behind his closed eyes. The pain had been blinding at first, then something else, pressure turning into sparks every time he thought about the memory. After the shower he followed the stranger's advice. He found a half-empty bottle of cranberry juice in the mini-fridge and drank it straight from the bottle. The tart taste made his mouth pucker. Then he ran a bath, dumped in the little packets of bath salts the motel provided, and lowered himself into the steaming water. The heat wrapped around his sore hole and he let out a shaky sigh. For the first time since the stranger walked out, his body started to relax. While he soaked, Micah replayed every word the guy had said. "You're a natural kid." The praise had landed somewhere between humiliating and strangely hot. Micah had never thought of himself as someone who could make another guy enjoy himself like that. Later, the stranger had taken his virginity completely, then left him with nothing but a photo and instructions for aftercare. Later, wrapped in a towel, Micah sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the blood-stained sheets in the hamper. It wasn't much, just a small dark patch, but it proved the night had been real. He wondered if the stranger was already home with his parents, acting as if nothing had happened. Micah's chest tightened. He had wanted connection, not just friction. The guy had been gentle in his own rough way, checking in, offering advice, but it still wasn't the tender first time Micah had imagined. He dressed slowly, every movement careful. The article deadline loomed in his mind, but he couldn't bring himself to write anything yet. Instead, he lay back on his side of the bed and pulled the blanket over his head. His phone buzzed with a missed call from his editor asking for an update on the story. Micah ignored Chelsea's notification. Right now, the only story he could think about was the one still throbbing between his legs, and the empty space beside him where the stranger had been. Sleep came in fits. Every time he shifted, the ache reminded him of the memory that had claimed him. In half-dreams he felt the stranger's hand on his back again, heard the low voice telling him to breathe. When morning light finally crept under the curtains, Micah sat up and looked at the photo one more time. He traced the stranger's smile with his thumb, then tucked the picture into his notebook. He still didn't know the guy's name, but the memory of that body moving inside him would stay with him for a long time. Micah stood, packed his bag, and left the room key on the dresser. The soreness followed him down the hallway and into the parking lot. Every step was a private reminder of what he had given away and what he had gained. He climbed into his car, started the engine, and drove toward the main road, already wondering if he would ever see the stranger again or if last night was meant to be a one-time secret he carried alone. Micah climbed up onto the bike and immediately regretted it. The moment he settled onto the seat, a sharp, stubborn ache made itself known again, forcing a quiet grimace out of him before he even started moving. He shifted his weight slightly, trying to find a better position, but there really wasn't one that didn't remind him of everything from the night before. "Yeah, great," he muttered under his breath. He pushed off anyway. The bike wobbled slightly at first as he found his balance, then steadied into motion. Each rotation of the pedals felt normal enough in his legs, but every bump in the road sent a dull, irritating reminder straight through him that made him tense his jaw and stare a little harder at the road ahead. The salt bath had helped more than he expected. It had taken the edge off, dulled things down from something sharp into something merely persistent, but it hadn't erased anything. It was still there, woven into every movement like a bad afterthought. Micah exhaled through his nose and adjusted his grip on the handlebars. The streets were quiet in that early Saturday way, the kind of morning where everything felt like it was still half asleep. The storm from the night before had washed the world clean, leaving behind wet pavement, reflective sidewalks, and a soft gray-blue sky slowly turning warmer as the sun climbed higher. A few cars passed in the distance. Somewhere a dog barked once and then stopped. The city felt far away from itself. Micah kept pedaling. He tried not to think too much. That was the safest option right now. Thinking too much meant remembering too much, and remembering too much meant his chest tightening in ways he didn't want to deal with while balancing on a bike that already felt uncomfortable in the worst possible way. Instead, he focused on smaller things: the rhythm of the pedals, the feel of the handlebars under his hands, the faint damp breeze that still lingered in the air. Street after street passed in a blur of familiarity, slowly returning. The route back to his grandmother's house was automatic by now. Left turn at the corner store, straight past the old park, right at the cracked sidewalk with the leaning mailbox. Each landmark pulled him further out of the strange night and back into something that looked like normal life again, even if he didn't quite feel like he fit back into it yet. By the time he reached her neighborhood, the sunlight had grown warmer and more solid. It was a calm, ordinary Saturday morning, bright enough that it almost felt like nothing unusual had happened anywhere at all. Micah slowed as he approached the house. It sat exactly as he remembered it, tidy, familiar, and grounded in a way everything else from the night before hadn't been. Curtains drawn in some windows, others slightly open. A stillness that felt intentional, like the house itself was holding onto its quiet. He coasted up the driveway and finally stopped. The relief of not pedaling anymore came immediately, but so did the awareness of everything else: his exhaustion, the lingering discomfort, the unanswered questions still sitting somewhere in the back of his mind like loose threads. He stayed on the bike for a second longer than necessary, just breathing. Then carefully he swung one leg off and stood, holding the handlebars to steady himself. A small, reluctant thought surfaced as he looked at the front door. Please don't ask too many questions. Because he wasn't sure how many answers he actually had. Micah stepped quietly through the front door, trying not to let it creak too loudly behind him. The house was already awake in that soft, early morning way, sunlight cutting through the blinds in the kitchen and scattering bright lines across the floor like stripes of gold. It was 7:30 a.m. The smell of something warm, coffee or toast, hung faintly in the air. Micah blinked against the light as he walked in, still tired, still carrying the leftover heaviness of the night in the way his shoulders sat slightly tense. And then he stopped. "Ah, there you are," his grandmother said from the kitchen table. She was already sitting down, calm as ever, like she had been waiting there for a while. A mug rested in front of her and the morning newspaper was folded neatly beside it. Micah let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I was worried about you," she added, not accusing, just factual. Concern wrapped in gentleness. Micah ran a hand through his damp hair, then sighed. "I'm sorry, grandmother," he said. "The game was washed out and then everything got delayed after. I didn't want to ride back in the rain, so I stayed somewhere so I wouldn't get caught in it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I didn't mean to make you worry, I'm sorry." His grandmother simply waved a hand, as if brushing the worry out of the air. "It's all right, dear," she said. "I know you're responsible, you don't get into trouble." Micah gave a small, tired nod, relieved more than he wanted to admit. "Would you like some breakfast?" she asked. "Yeah," he said quietly, "that'd be nice." She smiled and turned toward the kitchen like the matter was settled. Micah leaned slightly against the counter, watching the normalcy of it all: the clink of dishes, the soft morning light, the steady rhythm of a house that hadn't been part of his chaotic night. "How did your team do last night?" she asked over her shoulder. "We lost again," Micah said. He gave a faint smile despite himself. I figured, she replied, that team isn't very good. Micah huffed a small laugh. No, they're not. She set a plate down on the table, then looked at him again. Did you meet any jocks or athletes for your journalism articles? Micah froze for half a second. The question landed differently than it should have. For a moment, his mind flashed rain, a red car, a hotel lobby, conversations that didn't make sense, questions that went too far and then somehow didn't go anywhere at all. He swallowed. Oh, he said quickly, yeah, actually, I did. His grandmother nodded, satisfied. Well, she said, sitting back down, that's good. At least the night wasn't wasted then. Micah stared at the table for a second longer, then gave another small nod. Yeah, he said quietly, I guess I got my interview. And as he said it, he wasn't entirely sure whether that was the truth, or just the easiest way to explain something he still didn't fully understand. The phone rang just as his grandmother turned back toward the stove. Would you get that, dear? She called casually, cracking another egg into the pan while bacon hissed beside it. Micah hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward and lifting the receiver. Hello, this is Micah, he said automatically. There was a pause on the other end. Not empty. Not uncertain. Just breathing. Slow, controlled. Micah's grip tightened slightly. Hello, he tried again, quieter now. Then the voice came through. Low. Flat. Familiar in a way that made something in his stomach tighten immediately. Keep your mouth shut, kid. Micah froze. The kitchen sounds behind him didn't stop, the clink of a spatula, the crackle of bacon, his grandmother humming softly to herself, but everything in Micah's awareness narrowed to the phone pressed against his ear. Don't worry, the voice continued, just don't make me regret picking you up in my car. Micah's breath caught slightly. His eyes flicked down, unfocused, as the words stopped being just threatening and started becoming recognizable. The phrasing. The tone. The casual way of speaking, like he already knew how Micah reacted to things. Last night surfaced in fragments. The hotel room. The car. The way the stranger had watched him too closely, asked too many personal questions, stayed too calm through everything that should have been normal. Micah's jaw tightened. Okay, he whispered under his breath, barely audible. His gaze shifted toward the hallway, then back toward the kitchen, where his grandmother was still completely unaware. The realization didn't come all at once. It clicked. Hard. The voice on the phone wasn't random. It wasn't a wrong number. It wasn't even separate from last night. It was the same guy. The stranger from the hotel room. Micah stood very still. The dial tone suddenly cut in sharp, final before he even spoke again. Click. Gone. Micah stayed holding the phone for a second longer anyway, staring at nothing. Behind him, his grandmother finally looked over. Micah, she asked gently, everything all right, dear? He swallowed. Then forced his hand to lower the receiver. Yeah, he said, voice controlled but distant, just wrong number. But even as he said it, his mind wasn't on breakfast anymore. It was on the fact that the night before hadn't stayed in the past. And the person from it had just reached him at home. Monday morning, the newspaper room buzzed with its usual early week energy, chairs scraping lightly, printers warming up, the faint smell of ink and coffee someone had smuggled in from the cafeteria. Chelsea was already there, leaned back in her chair with a pen tapped against her notebook like she was counting down seconds. Micah walked in slower than usual. He still felt like he hadn't fully caught up to the weekend. Chelsea looked up immediately. Well, she said without even greeting him properly, did you get the interview with Ayers? Please tell me you did. Micah paused near the edge of the desk, shifting his bag strap higher on his shoulder. It wasn't with Ayers, he said. Chelsea's expression tightened instantly. What do you mean it wasn't with Ayers? Micah hesitated. He left after the game, he explained. I couldn't find him, I asked around but he was already gone. Chelsea stared at him for a beat like she was processing whether to be disappointed or furious first. So you didn't get him, she said flatly. No, Micah admitted, but I got his best friend. That made her blink. Ayers has a best friend. Apparently, Micah said, dropping into the chair across from her. He said Ayers left right away. I interviewed him instead. Chelsea leaned forward a little now, interest flickering back in. Okay, she said slowly, that might actually work. What's his name? Micah opened his notebook, flipping through a few damp pages from the weekend, then paused. I didn't get it, he admitted. Chelsea groaned and leaned back again. Micah, she said, you had one job. I know, he said quickly, but I've got the notes. I can still write it up. Chelsea studied him for a second, then sighed. Fine, she said, give it to Leonard. He'll clean it up and get it into the issue. Micah nodded, relieved to be off the hook for the moment. Chelsea tapped her pen against the desk again, then added more casually now. Next time, don't lose the star player and the backup interview, okay? Micah gave a small, tired half-smile. Yeah, he said, next time. But as he turned back toward his notes, there was still a small part of his mind that wasn't on school or football or deadlines. It was still on the weekend. And the feeling that something from it hadn't finished following him yet. About 20 minutes later, the hum of the newsroom had settled into a steady rhythm, papers shuffling, keyboards clicking, someone laughing too loudly near the printer. Micah was trying to focus on his notes when the sound of sharp footsteps cut through everything. Chelsea. She didn't slow down. She stopped right beside his desk. You know, Micah, she said, voice low but tight with frustration, some of us actually take the newspaper seriously around here. Micah looked up immediately, straightening a little. I do take it seriously, he said quickly, I just told you. I am under a lot of stress, every issue that comes across my desk, she cut in, not letting him finish. I sign my name to it. I don't have time for jokes, pranks, or whatever the fuck it is you do when I tell you to get an interview. Micah blinked. I didn't. When I tell you to get an interview, Chelsea continued, her voice rising slightly, I want the interview. And when you do get the interview, don't tell me you didn't get the interview. Micah frowned. That's not what I said, he tried again, more carefully. I said I couldn't find Ayers, but I got his. Okay, fucking seniors, she snapped, already turning away. She stormed back across the room before he could finish, her chair scraping loudly as she grabbed last Tuesday's edition of the newspaper. Then she slammed it down on her desk hard enough that a few nearby heads turned. The room went quiet for half a second before work resumed, slower now, more cautious. Micah just sat there for a moment, staring at the desk in front of him. He exhaled through his nose, then looked back down at his notes. But his focus wasn't on the story anymore. It was on the feeling that no matter how normal school looked from the outside, everything about his life still felt slightly off-center, like he was trying to catch up to something that kept moving ahead without him. Micah caught the low ripple of laughter before he fully registered what was happening. A couple of the other reporters, older students near the printer station, were watching Chelsea across the room, shoulders shaking as they tried not to laugh too openly. Micah frowned slightly, turning his head. What? He asked under his breath. One of them, George, leaned back in his chair with a grin as he just watched something especially satisfying unfold. Good prank, Micah, George said casually. I haven't gotten Chelsea that good in weeks. Micah blinked. What prank? George's grin faltered a little, like he hadn't expected that response. You know, he said, gesturing loosely toward Chelsea's desk. The interview thing, saying you didn't get Ayers when you actually got someone else, that was solid. She was furious. Micah went still. That wasn't a prank, he said flatly. George laughed once, assuming he was joking. Come on, he said, you're not serious. You had to know she'd react like that. Micah stared at him for a second longer. Then his expression shifted just slightly. Not anger yet. Something more unsettled. I didn't set her up, Micah said quietly. I told her exactly what happened. George's smile faded a bit now. Across the room, Chelsea was still at her desk, flipping through last week's paper with sharp, irritated movements, completely unaware of the conversation happening behind her. Micah looked back down at his notes, jaw tightening slightly. I didn't even get the interview I was supposed to get, he added, mostly to himself. George hesitated, then shrugged awkwardly. All right, he said, my bad, I just assumed. But Micah wasn't really listening anymore. Because suddenly it wasn't just Chelsea being angry. It was the realization that, in the newsroom's version of events, his entire night had already been rewritten into something he never intended. And no one seemed to be waiting for the truth version to catch up. "No, no," George said, leaning forward again like he was correcting a misunderstanding that didn't exist. "Not getting another interview. You, Micah, actually got the right interview with Ayers." Micah's brows pulled together slightly. "Yeah," he said slowly, "I know her, I didn't." George pointed at him like that was the setup. "But you told Chelsea you didn't," George said, grinning. "That's the prank." Micah blinked once. "I didn't tell her that," he said flatly. George laughed like he didn't believe him. "Oh, come on," he said. "You totally played it off. She was expecting Ayers and you come in like, nope, didn't get him, and she flips out, that is gold." Micah's grip tightened slightly on his pen. "That's not what I said," he repeated. George kept talking anyway, getting more animated. "That is the best prank I've heard of in years," he said. "You really had her spinning. I heard her scream from her own desk when she noticed the picture." Micah stopped moving completely. "What picture?" he asked slower now. George waved it off casually. "The one you turned in with your notes," he said. "Ugh."